There, oh my God, take the kids out of the room. The Chinese are coming. Yes, part 2 of our mini special about the Chinese invasion in the motorcycle market in Brazil. Now, with the CFMoto, look how tiny the CFMoto is here on the tank. CFMoto, CLC 450, and that's it. Right, you have the CLC 450, and that's it, which has this more traditional custom look. And then you have the CLC 450. Bobber, which comes with a single seat setup, has that more bobber look and costs 1,000 reais more. This one costs 32. The bobber, with the name bobber, costs 33, but this one also has a pretty strong bobber vibe. Right, with this super wide tire up front, yeah. At first ride, it feels like you're riding a current mini Harley Sportster 1250, the dual exhaust, the rougher sound with a bit of sportiness. So now, if you want to dig deeper into who CFMoto is, in the grand scheme of things, what are the characteristics of the Chinese motorcycle market? And why did Chinese motorcycle manufacturers, even before car manufacturers, start prioritizing the external market, the export market? In the previous video about the sister of our CLC here, the Ibex 450, which I believe will be the flagship of CFMoto as they enter Brazil. There are already 8 dealerships, and the Ibex 450 is, let's say, a sister model. It's a mid-displacement trail bike, very similar in appearance to the Ibex 700, which is the big adventure bike, or rather a mid-size adventure bike. From CFMoto and the 2 CLCs, which are practically identical, right? So with these 4 bikes, with these 4 models, is CFMoto entering Brazil? To learn more about the story. The size, yes, it's a big player. Take a look at the other video. Let's talk a bit more about this beauty here. I like the tracks, the fat tires, 16-inch wheels right, on both wheels, even though the front end feels a bit heavy. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But after all, what is a bobber, right? On Brazilian motorcycle internet, any characterization of a motorcycle style will already have someone in the comments. But that's not a bobber, that's not a chopper, that's not a sports tourer, right? It seems like there's an obsession with labeling things, but in short, bobbers are the bikes from the post-war era. Yeah, people in the American market who had this custom motorcycle culture, right? Harley style bikes, let's call them that, cruiser bikes. They would strip them down to make them lighter, right? To make them more agile. So usually a bobber has a very shortened front fender here, bobbed, right? Shortened. That's where the term comes from, often associated with having a solo seat, right? That seat that looks like a horse saddle, maybe a bit exaggerated. Yeah, exactly, to reduce weight, often leaving the rear fender exposed, right? That's why the model actually called bobber is more of a bobber than this one here. But this one also has a bit of that bobber style. I like the look, especially in this black color, and I like the price, right? It's a competitive price, especially when we look specifically at this niche, right? And I like the detail here, the finish, you know? You can see that it's a bike with a really interesting build quality. The TFT panel here with a setup, I have to admit, I really liked it, you know? It looks very vintage, even with the needle. I'm going to start it up here so you can enjoy the sound too. And then you'll see actually another characteristic of this type of bike. Custom, bobber, chopper, and similar ones. It's about the key, right? The ignition is here next to the engine and the handlebar lock is higher up. The perfect formula for you to forget you lock the handlebar and fall when you take off. Something I did once or twice with my old 883 back in 2007. Yeah, painful memories aside, right? Let's fire up the engine here. We're talking about the same engine as the Ibex, right? The 2-cylinder engine with 43, almost 44 horsepower and 4.3 kilogram-meters of torque. So it's an engine with interesting numbers, especially when we compare it to the competition. We'll talk about that in a bit, especially when we consider the weight of the bike, right? A 183 kilo bike for this type of motorcycle with this more custom vibe. I remember my 883 weighed Definitely more than 200 kilos. My XR 1200 weighed 240 kilos. I never forgot that. That's why I let it go. I couldn't handle it. Or rather, I got tired after a while of riding a 240 kilo bike every day in Sao Paulo. But hey, let's fire up the engine here. There you can see the little speedometer needle, right? But look, there's the digital tachometer, the clock, so it gives you real-time feedback on the LED screen, something an analog panel wouldn't do. I'll place it by the exhaust to see if it picks up more. It's an interesting sound, right? It's not a sound usually associated with this type of bike, right? In fact, it's the same case. This bike here, in terms of personality, really reminds me of the Morini Calibro Bagger, which you saw recently on the channel. Take a look at that video. Of course, here, the engine displacement is much smaller and the price is much lower too. But when it comes to having a higher revving engine than you'd expect for this segment, because normally we associate it with those lazier engines, right? The big V-twins, they're not that high revving, sometimes even a bit rougher. That's not the case here. Now that I turned it on, let me show you again. It does a little animation. But then you see the little gauge. I like the little gauge with an analog look, but in a digital format here, look, wow, doing its dance. But the Chinese, who are no fools, did a really good job. In the design of this bike, right, Harley does have models abroad with this engine size in this range of bikes. Middleweight, as Royal Enfield calls it, right, which allows the brand to have volume in emerging markets like ours, right? Here in Brazil, Harley in Brazil decided not to play that game. And actually, specifically in this 450 range, there's no one playing the custom game, right? Royal plays here with bikes like the Shotgun in this range, or rather with the same twin cylinder, right? From the Interceptor and the Bear 650, and at the same point, same price, right? So when you take a look, you go, wait a minute. Royal is offering more displacement for the same price in the same style, just a little price difference in favor of CFMoto here, but the 650 from Royal has that little extra punch. It's more laid back, right? That engine is just delightful, super flexible, right? Lots of low-end torque in the city. But when you push it, it says it doesn't want to be pushed. It doesn't keep pulling. That's it. Here we have an engine that's a bit more suited for that, which even reminds me of another Royal engine, the Sherpa 450 engine. It's in the Gorilla, it's in the game. On the Himalayan, which is an engine that likes to rev, but at the moment doesn't have a more custom application from Royal. Once again, I think the value for money of the bike is really strong. I think this custom segment in that 30 range, because the custom, or bobber in this case, is a bike that really appeals. That's why it was my first bike. Also, in Sao Paulo, because of the low position, right? The seat here is only 70 centimeters high. Slower reactions in this case, plus an extra bonus, plus an additional extra with 3 redundancies. The thing is, it's not a very heavy bike, and why am I saying all this? To say that these are bikes that are great as a first bike, right? And you see that it has parts, right? Big brakes here with ventilated discs on the front and rear. That's what makes a dynamic package. Really attractive for guys who want this style, right? It's a bike, it's an urban custom, right? When we think about this engine size, but it also offers reasonable performance, right? Well, let's put it this way. When you speed up on the road and it's well equipped, right? LED headlight, you can pair your phone here with the CFMoto app to get navigation, even music, and you don't need to keep your phone open. You have it here, just like Royals. The rear lights are also in that style without the central tail light, right? Royal uses this on the Gorilla. I like this style too. Anyway, another product from CFMoto that seems quite competent to me. Speaking of bobbers, right? A straight handlebar is typical of bobbers. I'm showing how this bike, though not called a bobber, shares many bobber features. But anyway, I think it's a very friendly bike for those considering it as a first motorcycle, and it's also priced quite attractively. Let's show a bit of this in action for you now. Here on the streets of Santa, man. Let's go. Come on, love. Check out how it hits the red line at 10 grand here. Our twin cylinder here on the glorious CLC. Not the bobber, right? Just the CLC 450.
Quenta.
Ah, the gold rim tires here handle the speed bumps in Sao Paulo pretty well. A nice little bike for daily use, right? The handlebar is quite narrow, right? Even with the bar end mirrors, it does well in the urban environment. The clutch, which is a slipper clutch, is extremely light. I didn't even mention that in the Ibex video. One of the things that caught my attention the most during my first contact with the bike was how light the clutch is, which helps make up this experience. I'm not sure if it's intentional, but it seems that way to me. It's an unplanned consequence, let's say, of it being such a beginner-friendly first bike. Right, which is another area where Royal does really well, right, with the 350s. Yeah, this question of what... Guys, about how low it sits, right? I'm sitting pretty low here. Kind of like a Fat Bob style, you sit further back with your arms more stretched out, right? Only the foot pegs here are closer, at a 90-degree angle. On the actual bobber, the foot pegs are more forward, but here it's more of a classic bobber style. That's another difference between the two models, so when you spend $1,000 more on the other version. Power, yeah, but... The thing that really stands out is how much the engine wants to rev, you know, and how it delivers torque right there in the mid-range. You know, look, we're at, I don't know if you can see, 4,000 RPM here, 60 look, third gear coming out of the speed trap, boom. The bike pushes and asks for another gear, right? The exhaust note is a bit rougher. Really, in terms of personality, it feels a lot like Marini, which also has a horizontal twin-cylinder engine, right? Yeah, compared to the 650 from Royal Wright, which is... No, it's also a twin-cylinder. No, the Royal is a V-twin, right? A little V-twin, yeah. What we have here, an engine that has a personality a little different from what we're used to expecting. In this motorcycle segment, right, which are bikes that go po-po-po-po-po, not the bikes that go pee like here, right? Yeah, it's very similar, right, to the Ibex NA. I don't really feel like the engine calibration of the CLC is much different from the Ibex. Engine, mapping, throttle, all those details. Look how well it goes through traffic here. But it's more compact, even a little lighter than the Ibex. Low center of gravity, narrow, right? It ends up being a custom bike that's highly recommended as a first motorcycle. Exactly, that's it. I remember having this conversation with my parents when I turned 18, right? At the time, and even today, but especially back then, the economy car was the classic first car. And from the beginning, I told my parents, I convinced them, look, a 1-liter car is a dangerous car. It doesn't have enough power. You need to have a certain amount of power. Back then, that meant a little 1.6 engine. So for example, you could speed up and get past a distracted guy in the middle of the lane in front of you. The accelerator, the quick response, the torque. It's as important a safety feature as brakes, for example, right? Or the ability to take a turn. So as a first bike, it's cool. Obviously, you don't need to have a very powerful bike, right? It's even better so you don't scare yourself. But having a weaker bike isn't ideal either for someone looking for their first bike. So I think this CLC ends up... It really hits the sweet spot, right in the middle, pretty cool, it's fast. There's a 6th gear here. Look, I haven't shifted into it yet, but I'm showing you that it has one. It's right after this little stretch here, leaving Banderantes. There's a 70 km/h speed camera here, the brakes over there. Okay, the brake modulation feels really nice too. Very well calibrated. In the Ibex video, I didn't talk much, right, about the slightly slow reactions of the front end. Here, you don't get any sense of anything different. It's a well-sorted bike, exactly as you'd expect. And here, we can give it a little stretch, right? But look, in 6th gear, with your hand steady, you can see that on the highway, it'll cruise at 120, 130 without any effort, Or even better, keeping something in reserve is always important, right? When you're cruising on the highway at 120 in 6th gear and you need to overtake, bam, you want power? Look, don't worry, you can relax, it's got it. Anyway, like I said in the Ibex video, our glorious CFMoto really makes an entrance, right? Maybe it'll be here soon, who knows? Is it scaring people? I wouldn't say scaring. Scaring is a strong word. But it shows that it's a brand that, at least when it comes to products, has what it takes to challenge the more established players. And it's getting started the right way. Let's put it that way, right? Going after niches that the bigger, more traditional brands don't serve that well. I would say that Royal and even Triumph with the Scrambler 400 kind of have that same retro bike vibe, right? But they don't have that custom vibe. And what about Royal's bikes in this segment? Well, they're either below with the 350 or above with the 650 in terms of engine size. And they have a different personality. If you want a bit more performance, a bit more responsiveness, even a bit more sportiness, although I'm a bit hesitant to use that word for a bike of this style, yeah. The CF, or rather the CFMoto CLC, the marketing part, the naming and all that, the Chinese are currently being outperformed by the Indians from Royal. But what about the product itself? With a clearly distinct personality, it does come to compete, yes. And it makes for a very interesting comparison between the two brands. With these two options, do you agree or disagree? Let us know in the comments what you think and what else you want to see from CFMoto motorcycles and other new players coming to Brazil. Here on the channel, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. That always helps us a lot. As always, thank you so much. Take care and a big hug.